What's up? Long time no see. I got sick and lost my voice for a week, and then it took me a while to get back on my feet with my house organization and stuff like that and taking care of my kids. In the meantime, I am 4 books behind. But don't worry, I'm not doing all 4 of them in one take. That would be super long. So right now I'm going to talk about Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. To give you a little background on how excited I was to read this book, I normally read books in the order in which I purchase them or they're given to me. And I have about, when I ordered this and when it arrived in the mail, I had about probably 9 or 10 books ahead of this one, and I went straight to the top of my list because I wanted to read it so badly. So for those of you who don't know, Trevor Noah is a comedian. He is from South Africa, but he now lives here in the United States. He is the host of The Daily Show on Comedy Central, and I love him. My husband introduced me to him, and I actually really don't like a lot of comedians, but Trevor Noah is one of the ones that I do like, and he's also one of my favorites out of the ones that I do like. So, he's awesome. So, this is his memoir. It's a bit more serious than his stand-up, but being the funny guy he is, he did throw a lot of humor into it. The chapter, it's not written in chronological order of his life. He actually, each chapter is kind of like a theme, and he just kind of goes all over the place, which is actually all right because it works for how his it works for his style of storytelling. And he also, what he does is at the beginning of each chapter he has a little section on racism and apartheid in South Africa and how that goes along with whatever the topic of that particular chapter is. So the reason it's called Born a Crime, and he does explain this in his stand-up comedy as well, is his dad is white and his mom is black, and when they got pregnant with him, interracial relations were illegal in South Africa. Hence, Trevor's birth was literally a crime. Which, for me, having interracial kids, that tugs at the heartstrings. Obviously, my kids are not illegal or anything like that, but I hope they don't face. I hope that as they grow up, the world gets better and they don't have to face any kind of discrimination from either culture that they belong to. So far, they've been fully accepted by everyone we've met. So, Trevor and his stand-up, you know, obviously it's really brief, and so I just figured his parents were just like illegally married but not married. But it turns out that wasn't the case. He goes into more detail in his memoir, and his parents had met at like underground social events, and his mom wanted a child, and she had chemistry with his dad, and so she asked him to father her child, and he didn't ever want kids, and at first he said no, and she basically told him, you know, you don't have to be involved, you can be as involved as you like or not involved at all, but I really want a child. And so he agreed, and she didn't even tell him when Trevor was born because she thought he didn't want anything to do with Trevor. And shortly after Trevor was born, he came to her and was like, I changed my mind, I have a child out there and I want to be a part of his life. So all of that had to be done behind closed doors. They couldn't go out to the park or anything like that, and there were a few instances where they went out in public and tried to hide that they were a family, and Trevor almost gave them away because he was a little boy and didn't know any different. And honestly, the whole thing is it's sad to me, like the fact that their relationship was illegal and looked down upon, and also the fact that Trevor wasn't fully made out of love. I know with my upbringing and background, I have a really naive view of the world, but I personally believe that kids should, when at all possible, be brought into as loving as a family as possible. But his mom and dad did love him in the best way that they could, and he did develop a better relationship with his father when he was an adult, which is good. So my favorite, so each chapter is a different story from his life, and my favorite stories from his book were 3 separate chapters about 3 different points of him attempting a romantic dating life during his teenage years. The first one was when he was like 12 or 13, and it was Valentine's Day, and his classmates suggested that he ask a certain girl to be his Valentine because they were both colored. They were the only 2 colored kids in the school. So in South Africa, colored means that you're mixed, or you're Asian, or you're Indian. And so he actually isn't even considered black in South Africa. And so he asked her to be his Valentine, and she said yes, and he used his the money he'd been saving up to buy her flowers and teddy bears and stuff like that. And then on Valentine's Day, she walked up to him and said, "So I'm sorry, but someone else also asked me to be their Valentine," and I said yes. So poor Trevor got dumped on Valentine's Day by his very first girlfriend. Second part to his attempt at romance during his teenage years was he had this gal friend who he had developed a crush on, but she had a on and off boyfriend, and so they were just friends, but he liked her more than that, and he had this like big plan to like woo her over a couple years and then take her to their version of prom, their senior year in high school. And she ended up moving to the United States at the end of their freshman year, and so obviously his plan didn't pan out. And her best friend told him after she moved, "Oh yeah, she totally had a crush on you." And he was like, "What? Oh, we could have been dating this whole time if I hadn't made such a slow plan." And so I found that funny and heartbreaking at the same time. And then the final chapter about his attempt at a romantic life during his teenage years was one of his friends got him a date for their prom. Well, it wasn't called prom, but that's the language I'm going to use since that's the language I know. And so his friend got him a date, and his date didn't go to their school, I don't think. And Trevor was really shy, so they didn't talk a lot while they spent time together before the dance. And then when it was time for the day of the dance, he was now late to picking her up because his stepdad wouldn't let him take the car he had promised him he could take. And so she was really mad, and she wouldn't get out of the car when they got to the school. And then Trevor eventually realized that she didn't even speak English. And she spoke a minor language in South Africa, and Trevor speaks like 3 to 5 different languages, and the language she spoke was one of the ones he didn't speak, so they couldn't even communicate with each other. And so he just stood out there all night with her because she refused to get out of the car. And after the dance, he drove her home, and she kissed him goodnight, and that was it. And he was really confused. And it's just funny to me. Like, not in a mean way funny, but, you know, dating as a teenager, it's hard, and it's terrible, and it's great all at the same time. So, the saddest story from his memoir is his mom dealing with abuse from his stepfather. This is on the more serious side. His stepfather hit her, but it was so infrequent, and throughout, so there were such long stretches of time in between the abuse that she didn't leave him. The way Trevor explained it was he would hit her, and then everyone would spend several months of walking on eggshells, and then things would calm down. She's like, oh, okay, I guess he's not going to do it again. And then, like, 2 or 3 years later, he would do it again. And every time his mom went to the police, they didn't take her seriously. And I think this is probably the saddest parts for me to read. I'm going to try to paraphrase as best I can, but the first time that Trevor's stepdad hit his mom took Trevor and Trevor's younger brother, who was his stepdad's son, to the police station, and she said, I need to write a report. I was hit. And the police were like, at first, you know, they're all business and serious. Okay, who hit you? Getting the paperwork out. And she said, my husband hit me. And they said, what did you do? She said, nothing. He hit me. Are you going to press charges? They're like, ma'am, he's your husband. Are you sure you want to do this? Because he'll go to jail and he'll have a record against him his entire life. Do you really want to ruin his life by doing this? And she was like, yes, he hit me. I want to press charges. And at that point, Trevor's stepdad came into the police station, and he said, you know, basically, hey, gentlemen, you know, this is my wife. I'm here to take her home. And they're like, okay, you know, just... He's like, you know how women are. Yeah. It was so demeaning. It was awful to read that. And, you know, the thing is, Trevor was born in 1984. He's my husband's age. He's 33, 34 years old right now. And so this happened in the late 80s, early 90s. And, like, for the police to act that way at what is technically supposed to be a more progressive era in human history is really sad and awful to read. But then again, it still happens today, unfortunately, and it's something that needs to change. And Trevor wrote that his mom called the police a couple more times, and they never took it seriously. Every time his stepdad was able to talk the police out of doing anything. And he said something. He said, at that point in my life, I realized that police officers are men first and police second. And that was a really eye-opening little jab in the heart thing to read, at least where he grew up. I know not all police officers are that way. I'm not anti-police. I love and respect my local police department. They're really great. They haven't given me a reason to not trust them. So, things got so bad between Trevor and his mom and his stepdad that, you know, Trevor moved out as soon as he graduated from high school. He was done. He begged his mom to leave his stepdad over and over, and she wouldn't. And then one day he got a call from his younger brother and said that his dad shot their mom, and she got shot in the head and she almost died. And and she didn't have insurance, and so the hospital wouldn't work on her to save her life until they had a payment. And luckily Trevor had money because he was already a comedian by then, and so he paid for all of it. And the doctor said it was a huge, he had no way to explain how Trevor's mom survived that gunshot wound, but she did, and she's still alive. So that was Trevor's mom was really religious, and she attributes surviving that incident to being in God's hand, and I believe her too. So there's so many other great stories in this book. 5 out of 5 stars for sure. I'm definitely keeping this book and will reread it throughout my life. I highly recommend it. And so yeah, Born a Crime. I loved it.